You're very welcome to the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast. I'm your host, Shane Derby. Before I introduce today's guest, I have a wee favour to ask you, dear listener. If you're enjoying the content, I would be very grateful if you might consider leaving us a star rating and possibly a written review on your podcast platform of choice. It really would mean a lot to me, while also helping with podcast engagement metrics. Enough of the requests, onward to the introduction. Dr. Alistair Mackenzie once wrote that as a rule, golf club committees should always have an uneven number, and that 3 was too many. He was all for informed and thoughtful, benevolent dictators, it would appear. And today, we are speaking to someone who may resemble the good doctor's aforementioned description. I'm very pleased to confirm that Mr. Ryan Noades, the Managing Director of the Addington Golf Club in South London, joins us today for a chat about the ongoing faithful restoration that he's overseeing with assistance from consulting golf course architects Clayton De Vries Pont. The Addington is, of course, a JF Abercromby and HS Colt design collaboration that dates from 1913. The Noades family have owned the property since 2006. Over the course of this episode, we take a look at the site, its history, its period of relative hibernation, and its ongoing reclamation and rebirth. Many thanks to Ryan for his time. We do hope that we don't get too far into the weeds as we discuss POA green cores, clay drainage pipes, heather propagation, and marginal gains. I suspect time will tell. Please enjoy, and many thanks for tuning in. I have a face for radio.
Nice personality.
Indeed. Ryan Noades, you're very welcome to the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast. How are you?
Thank you. Yeah, very well. It is, 8, 9 a.m. in the morning on a freezing cold, still dark, well, not quite day in February.
Summer's coming, though. It's getting brighter. It's getting warmer.
Well, spring. It's one step at a time.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully we'll like to see some grass growth soon.
Yeah.
We'll see.
How's the soil temperature at the moment? Non-existent.
Giving up measuring it. What is it? It's like 3 degrees at 4 degrees, 2 degrees at night, 5 degrees during the day. So it looks like it's going to be like that for the next 10 days before we get back up to double digits. So bring on March ASAP.
And how quickly does it warm up out of interest? I memean, you're monitoring that the whole time. I mean, I know it needs to get to 7, 8 degrees for germination, but growth is kind of probably 5, 6.
I always kind of, we leave these things up to the greenkeepers, but in my mind, always look at 12. Like when you're at sort of 12 degrees a bit more consistently, then I think that's when things really start to kick off. But it just seems you always get this mad flurry in spring where everything starts to grow and it seems to catch everybody off guard. And I've always wondered, is it really growing that much faster than it does in like May, June? But there just seems to be this moment where the whole team's had 6 months of not having to deal with growing grass, and then all of a sudden it goes, and it's like everybody's on the back foot. I've been trying to think the last few years like how to preempt that more, because it does seem like we deal with that every year. This should be something we can preempt.
I think it's the same from the member side as well. It's almost as if they're surprised every year at the same time. They're giving out about the state of the greens all winter, and then they suddenly, when the greens start to grow and the surfaces get a bit better, Jesus, they're rough.
Well, yeah, the rough, and then also like usually a bit of April greens maintenance, and then probably a more major greens maintenance in August. It's like 1st of April, 1st of August every year, never changes.
Yeah,
and it's still surprising. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I've often thought about doing like some YouTube videos with some graphics, like sort of doing a layman's version of greenkeeping, and then you can just send it out every year at the right time, just to get people's brains in gear into what's about to come. We've all seen it before every year. Anyway, we're rambling.
We are. Listen, you took in the PGA show again. I know you're just back from what sounds like a fairly epic golfing road trip to the States with the guys at Cookie Jar. How was the trip?
Yeah, fantastic. Very cold. I mean, we got there and it was, I think the first night was -7, where I was told that we landed in Orlando, but the further north, supposedly, first time they were having snow, as long as they can remember, in northern Florida. So we did have on the weekend that was coming up, we were meant to be up in Georgia, and we had to cancel all that. It was all snowed over. So we went further south to West Palm Beach and saw a couple of courses that we hadn't been planning to see, but were, fantastic. Had a great trip. Saw Cabot Citrus Farms, which is the old, I think it's World Woods was the previous golf course, like resort, and they Cabot bought it and have, as far as I'm told, totally different. It's not any resemblance to what was there before, but yeah, never thought there was that kind of golf in Florida, that kind of very sandy, more something you'd expect to see maybe in the Carolinas, that kind of sandy waste areas like Pinehurst, but having that in Florida, really cool to see. Really fun golf. Saw Stream Song as well. But yeah, it's the new development industry for golf is obviously thriving. It's great to see those courses. Very impressive.
Where is that vein of sand that runs through Florida relative to the major population centres, or where people might be enjoying themselves in Orlando or wherever else?
So Cabot would be at, like, if you're looking at the map at Orlando, let's say you go to sort of 9:30, 10 o'clock, so you're driving sort of west, slightly north, about an hour and a half. And then that would be at Cabot. And then Stream Song would be, thanks. Sorry. Cheers. It's my coffee.
Well, you did ring that through, so.
True. My Stream Song would be, let's say, further. So say if you're in Orlando and you go down to like, what would it be, like 7:30, you're sort of going down towards Tampa, a couple of hours drive, and Stream Song's kind of around that area.
Okay.
About an hour south of Tampa.
Okay. So you took in the PGA show again. Did you come across anything or anyone interesting at the convention centre?
Yeah, the monster truck buggy that was about 12 feet tall. I don't know if you saw the pictures of that.
I did. Are you investing in a few for growing?
Yeah, you've got a fleet of 100 of them coming up at the Addington next week.
Not for winter use, I suspect.
Yeah. I'm more interested in actually who buys that.
Yeah.
Like, what are you using it for?
Yeah.
Is it just someone that lives on a resort that drives it from their house to the golf course? And how do they get in and out of it?
Perhaps it's somebody with more money than sense, I would suspect.
Well, we need to get Sam and Tom, the Cookie Jar, go and do like an expose on who the customers are that are buying this machine. I mean, they've probably spent 50 grand on their booth just to be at the PGA show.
Yeah. Well, there's obviously a market for it. I doubt it's you or me, but somehow maybe we're a little bit more purist. You're joining us from your office at the Addington Golf Club in South London. For the benefit of listeners who either are hiding under a rock, haven't visited, or don't know anything about the grounds for golf on Shirley Church Road, perhaps you might provide us with an introduction to the site as they might find it today.
Today, it's a heathland golf course, southeast London, 112 years old now. It's if you've, I don't know how to answer that question. What would you?
I'm just wondering about the topography or the aspect of it. How would you compare it to other golf courses? Just the very top line stuff.
It's a hilltop site, so there's a lot of undulation on the golf course. That's what I would say makes it different from other courses. It gives it a distinctive feel. Is the topography, how much elevation change there is on any given hole or from hole to hole. And that also means that there's less of a need for bunkering, because a lot of the challenge and the strategy is created using the topography. So it's quite dramatic. It's visually dramatic from being the highest spot for about 20 miles in every direction. You are on this hilltop overlooking London. and then overlooking the North Downs to the south. So you got. I heard this term actually, which I'd never heard before, which apparently is something someone said to me. It was something Mike Kaiser asked on a site visit, and it was, "What is your visual acreage?" Which I'd never heard that before. But the point being, what is the size of the area that you can see from the site? Because the site, anyway. So the visual acreage for the Addington is enormous.
So how many counties do you reckon?
How many counties? You can definitely see Kent, and I guess it's whether you cast London, I suppose, would be a separate county. So let's say 3, the one you're in, and 2, one north and one south.
Okay. Listen, we'll delve into a bit more detail about the specifics of the site, but I just wanted to say thank you once again for hosting me on the walking tour back in August 2023. Now, I'm absolutely sure you've accompanied many visitors around the course over the years. On the day in question, you reminded me of a kid on Christmas morning. Your pride and passion for the place was and is infectious. As is your dog, Arlo. Arlo? Is that right?
Yeah. You see it. That's...
I didn't play back then, but however, I did make it back in 2024, as you're aware, with a good mate of mine from Australia. During the planning process for our multi-day trip through Surrey, Sussex and Kent, I initially floated the Addington as a possible venue for consideration. The response was as follows: "Mate, I've never heard of the Addington. Can we not go to the Berkshire?" So, because I'm a reciprocal, which he is, but we were heading for Deal and Rye and the Kent coast. So the Berkshire wasn't exactly convenient. Croydon obviously is a much better starting point for the Kent coast when compared to Ascot. Now, I guess having had that time between visits, it was remarkable the additional maturity of the place. Obviously, you just finished Purdue, the new Part 3, and obviously a lot of the areas that you're revegetating had come on so much in the 12 months. As I was saying to you there a little bit earlier on before we pressed record, seeing somewhere mature like that from an iterative perspective, very much like my experiences at St. Patrick's Links up in Rosapenna, actually, and something that I must say, the 3 or 4 places that stood out to me in 2024, Deal was one, Royal Liverpool another, Rye another, St. Patrick's Links, but the Addington as well, really shine like beacons as standout places that I visited. I mean, one of the major differences, I think, having admittedly not played the year before, but the turf last July was so bouncy. And you mentioned earlier on the topography lends itself to actually position the golf ball, but that becomes more difficult when it's actually firm.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons we've needed, I would say, to get those original corridor widths back, because you take our 5th hole, for example, it's just, you could say it's just a relatively long straight par 4. But there's a really severe pitch for the fairway from right to left, going down to the left. And in the past, you had this really tight corridor that you could hit the ball into. And basically you had to hit a cut against the slope, or you could hit the middle of the fairway in the summer and you lost your ball because it would just bounce left and keep going left. And everything off the fairways 10, 15 years ago was just solid rhododendrons, azaleas, I guess, for our American counterparts, similar to those sorts of bushes, and you would just lose your ball. So the firmness of the site, I think, is, I mean, like I said, it's on a hill, and geologically, as I've been explained and learning over the last few years, is it's pure gravel. Whereas everything around us is chalk and clay, which is quite common for Kent and London areas. And one of the reasons I think it drains so well is because of the gravel. But the reason also it's unique in its area, in that if you look at the southwest of London, where all the heathland courses are, predominantly Sunningdale, Ascot, Berkshire, Swinley, St George's Hill, Walton Heath, they're in that corridor to the southwest, which, as I understand it, there are sort of big areas of sand there that have evolved into those heathland habitats that create the firm, dry conditions that we need to build golf courses, or at least 100 years ago they did. Whereas to the southeast, there isn't anything like that. And we're the only heathland site really for, well, like 20, 30, 40 miles in every direction pretty much.
Do you know if the gravel that you're on, is that a glacial deposit, or where did it geologically come from?
Someone was saying to me, it's essentially the seabed from 100 million years ago.
Okay.
But I don't know whether that's true. But it's essentially sandy gravel, and literally the boundary of the golf course on all sides pretty much is like the bottom of the hill, and then you get into clay. So yeah, we're a heathland site, and there's no other heathland sites around us really, except for Addington Hills, which is on the same sort of height as us, which is just next door. But that is basically the same hill. So yeah, unique sort of site geologically, but that gives us the firmness, it gives us the drainage, it gives us the heathland characteristics, which we all love for golf, and it makes us a sort of one of a kind in this area at least.
I believe some of the gravel was quarried at one point in time.
Yeah, so I guess in the sort of late 1800s they were using it for to build roads, as the base for roads and things like that. So the bunker on the 6th, although I've heard it's a bomb crater, it was a quarry from I think like 1890 or something. It was mined all the way out the right side of the 6th green out to the road. So yeah, a lot of the roads around here, I'm told, were built with a stone coming out of the Add from about 130 years ago.
And before the golf materialised, the estate was the summer home to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it was 1809. Actually wrote it down, 1807 to 1897. So 90 years. The Addington Palace is a big stately home. I think it's grade 1 listed stately home. That is, you can see it from our 9th tee. You can see the roof of it. And our site and what is a golf course next door called Addington Palace Golf Club were all part of the grounds for Addington Palace, which was the summer home for the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is, the Archbishop is like the main man for Christianity. The Pope to Catholicism is the Archbishop to Christianity. So yeah, the Addington was his summer home, and then for whatever reason, the Archbishops of Canterbury decided to sell it in just before 1900, and then in 1913, part of the site was bought for this golf course.
So maybe a little bit of a history lesson in terms of the Noades' involvement in golf, obviously through the Alton Group. I believe yourself and your extended family run the Godstone Golf Club, Woldingham, Westerham, Surrey National, and indeed the Addington, which I think your dad bought back in 2006, an occasion he described as the peak of his lifetime achievements. How did the Noades family get involved in golf?
So Dad was in football. He owned Crystal Palace Football Club, and before that Wimbledon, and after that Brentford. And he'd always had a dream of. We had a problem where you'd get young kids, 16, 17, 18 years old, never had any money, that would get a contract to play football, and suddenly they'd have a bit of money, they'd have a car, and they'd be finishing training at 2 or 3 o'clock, and they're getting into trouble all afternoon, evening with their friends. And he thought, well, we've got to find a way to sort of keep these guys off the street and keep them out of trouble. And he thought, what if we had a low impact activity that kind of made them socialize? And golf, in his mind, was the answer to that. So his idea for a long time that he wanted to build was a football training ground for the team next to a golf course. And the idea was the team would finish training and then they would all go play golf together, and it would help the team socialize and bond more. And you'd sell memberships to the golf course because members of the public would want to play golf where, the footballers were there, and that you could even sort of go and watch the training if you wanted to in the morning. So that was the idea, and he found the site for Westrum Golf Club in, I'm guessing, 1995, because I think they started building in 96. It opened in 97. But never fully got to see that through because he ended up selling Crystal Palace in 1998. So pretty short-lived, but a lot of the footballers for the first year were members of the golf club, and there was and is a little bit of heritage in our clubs having a lot of athletes that my dad would have introduced as members. But yeah, that was the idea. That's how it started. And then I think as he started to get older and looking more towards retirement, not that he ever retired, but he started getting more into golf and probably got that bug, went, and then after Westrum, I think just even before Westrum opened, he'd found the site for Surrey National, which initially I'm told was being designed and built to try and host the Ryder Cup, like before Dad even bought it. So when he bought it, I think it had planning permission for a golf course. So the golf course was all routed out and everything, but by someone who had ambitions to host the Ryder Cup. But whatever that be, that as it may, he bought it, opened that about a year after Westrum, and then Woldingham and Godstone. Woldingham was an existing golf course down the road that he bought a few years later. So he'd built two, bought Woldingham. Godstone's a 9-hole that was the former Palace training ground that he kept when he sold Palace, and that got turned into a 9-hole, I think, in 2004. And so ended up with 4 golf courses, 3 of which he built, one of them a 9-hole. And then 2006, the Addington comes up for sale, which he did everything he could to try to buy. I think that comment about it being, one of his lifetime achievements is he sort of represented in the area something that he would have never been able to be a part of, because he didn't, he would have gone to the wrong school, or, not been to private school. And probably in his mind, it would have been somewhere that he wouldn't have been allowed to join. So being able to then, buy that and be a part of it in his mind was like a crowning achievement, towards the end of his career, let's say.
And how about you and the golfing bug? I believe, obviously, during uni holidays, you rotated around the various departments of the Altonwood Group. You seem to linger a little longer in the greenkeeping department, though, as a preference. Is that right?
Yeah. It's. I've been trying to remember what those dates were, because I don't remember it being uni holidays, because it was always the winter, because we were always doing tree removal. But that's the thing I remember the most, is doing, because my dad wanted me to do rotations in different departments in the business. And I remember when I was in the greenkeeping teams, if in the winter, we'd be cutting down trees because the grass isn't growing. And I think that this is the way most golf clubs in the UK operate. I mean, let's say they've got 5 or 6 greenkeepers and the grass is growing in the summer, all hands on deck, pretty much non-stop cutting grass. You haven't got time for anything else. In the winter, the grass isn't growing. And those the full-timers that you have on staff are able to actually make some course improvements. So I think that's generally how most courses in the UK operate. And course improvements for us quite often was tree removal. And I just noticed that every course, Westrum, Surrey National, with less tree removal at Woldingham was done, but just the woodland management, whenever you took a tree down, it immediately improved the golf hole. And it always struck me how much resistance there was as well from the membership when you would talk about the tree removal in advance. And then you would do it, and everybody would agree it was an improvement. Maybe not right away if they see the tree on the ground, but we had a lot of members that would not play through the winter, and they'd come back in spring, and the grass, the area had basically recovered, and they'd either not notice or comment on how much better it was. I don't think there was ever an instance where you'd take a tree out and everybody said that's made it a lot worse. So that kind of really opened my eyes as to then going to the Addington, which was one of my last stints, And with the topography there, it was like those improvements that I was noticing at the other clubs when you're doing tree removal. It was like that on steroids, because it was just you started to then actually see the topography within the woodland as to what this asset was that we had that was just so impressive, and how much more it could be by just going back into those areas that had been claimed by growth over half a century.
When did you realize it was different? I mean, the untapped potential, and maybe apropos the site and the opportunity that the Addington presented.
It was a slow burn for sure. I think those are different moments, that knowing it was different and seeing an opportunity. I guess initially everybody always regarded it as the best course in the area. So it was always known to be a cut above the others. And so I think that was the sort of starting point of my understanding. And then having been on site, I think every moment with the greenkeeping team there just reaffirmed and increased, every iteration of what I saw increased what I thought the potential was. And then when I started training to be a surveyor, I started playing in the Chartered Surveying Golf Society, which is over 100 years old. But they have a lot of their meetings are at the likes of Sunningdale, the Berkshire, Swinley Forest, and seeing those golf courses more made me see a lot of what the Addington had in them, and I started to see those similarities as a heathland golf course, and recognizing how the Addington was essentially a shell of what it would have been in the past, with all the heather that had been lost and a lot of the deciduous trees that had grown over it, whereas those other courses had been looked after for 100 years. The Addington probably hadn't been sort of highly regarded since 1930, 1940. So yeah, slow burn.
Yeah, it was the place. I mean, if we go back in time, you mentioned it's 112 years old. And although it never was bestowed the title Royal Addington, it might as well have been.
Yeah, I think it was actually referred to as Royal Addington colloquially, but that was more to do with the fact that it was, where the king played his golf. It was all the lords and MPs, and you got to think back in before World War II, you weren't really driving to a golf course. I mean, car technology, it wasn't like you could drive like 500 miles. I think there was a limited range, and there's a reason why all these old golf courses, it's not a coincidence they're all near train stations. The Sunningdale, Woking, West Hill, like they're all right by the train tracks. And it's a bit chicken or egg. I don't know whether the golf course, I'm guessing there'll be both examples, but maybe in some instances the golf course was built next to the station, and in other cases they built the station next to where they found the golf course. But certainly back in 1920, 1905, you would have been traveling from London by train to get to a lot of these golf courses. That's because they're probably about 30 miles away, those ones to the southwest. The Addington, however, is about 9 miles or so from central London. So it was one of the few courses that, of the courses regarded as London's golf courses, that you would have actually been driving to. And I think in 1920, let's say, I'm not sure at that point everybody's got a car. And so it's still the sort of wealthy that are getting driven by their chauffeur down to South London. And I don't know that it took that long back then. I've got newspaper articles from the 20s and 30s talking about it being a 25-minute drive from Liverpool Street to the Addington, with, I think, it describes the last bit of that journey between East Croydon Station and the Addington Golf Course as a dirt track. And they're still doing it in 25 minutes. So it's not a great distance. It's very, very close to London. And because of that, and because of who was playing there, namely basically the people in government and royal family, it was known as London's golf course and referred to as Royal Addington.
So a club for the aristocracy then opened in 1913.
Yeah.
Who owned it? I mean, obviously the archbishops of Canterbury and the church owned it in previous, but who was the landowner that looked to develop it? I know it was developed by a syndicate of some description.
Yeah, so this is what's another unusual thing about the Addington, and also to do, I think, with the sort of wealth and power in London that was behind it, is that almost all these other golf courses that were built in this golden age were collectively owned members' golf courses, and the Addington was, as far as we can tell, a project put together by Abercromby, who got backing with financial backing from Lord Lurgan to go and put together a small group of founding members who were going to build themselves their own private club to really give themselves better access to golf versus these other clubs that had got so popular that were, generally quite hard to get on and perceived as being overrun. So it was, a small group of very wealthy people that decided they wanted their own club, and because of that, the shares were never offered to the wider membership. It was always a very small group of people that held shares, and that continued all the way through to today, where it's only ever been a very small group of individuals who have ever owned the golf course. But it was the vehicle for which the purchase, the vehicle that was created for the purchase was called the Addington Golf Club Syndicate. And that was a company created in 1913 to issue shares to those few shareholders and to own the land and the golf course and club.
There's always an Irish connection, and I think William Brownlow, the third Baron Lurgan, he was a member and a shareholder.
Yeah. So Lurgan, as far as we can tell, Lurgan was the money initially that really got the Abercromby. I mean, Abercromby was a stockbroker in London as well as a golf course architect, and seems to have been fairly well connected to money and in London. And being a good golfer, I think in those days, it seems like a lot of the people that were highly regarded in the golf industry were the ones that could play. And Abercromby, by all accounts, was a plus handicapper back in those days. Lord Lurgan was, let's say, probably the first person in with Abercromby, putting the money behind it for him to then go and raise money with the founding members. I mean, there's a bit of a change because in 1913, so World War I hasn't started yet, and we've got the original share certificates where what they're trying to do is actually like a debenture scheme, so it's one of the earliest debenture schemes that I guess would exist in the golf industry, where they're selling a large price, lump sum golf membership that would give you access to the golf course for, I think it was going to be 23 years where you weren't going to pay an annual subscription, and they only had 50 of them. So you were going to, the idea was that it was only going to be offered to members of the peerage, so basically lords, dukes, earls, marquises, really kind of like the top end of British aristocracy. And then World War I happens, and as far as we can tell then, they've basically scrapped that idea because it was probably not going to work financially, and they've opened the doors a little bit more after that, and it wasn't quite as exclusive as they'd originally intended, but still became, probably, I've seen newspaper articles from that time saying it was the most exclusive club in the UK for certain, if not the world. So it certainly became an incredibly exclusive group of people that were allowed to play there post World War I. And then that's its heyday, really, 1920s, 1930s until the start of World War II.
Another Irish connection I came across, Dr. J.A. Flaherty apparently was a well-known London-based Irish international golfer who was also a member of the Addington in the 1930s. He was a winner of the Addington Foursomes, I believe, with Bill Twine in 36 and 38, and a two-time amateur championship competitor at Sandwich in 37 and Troon in 38. And maybe if we get back to Abercromby for a second, by 1913 the standard of play by the average golfer, I think, was improving. Technology, the clubs, the balls, and these people had time, I suppose, is the major thing. Both the designers and the players as well. They were professional gentlemen, perhaps, and to a lesser degree, professional ladies too. So I guess the designers had an ambition to do a little bit more. You know, Aber found the perfect site, really, I suppose, to show off his design intentions. Do you know how he found the site? Any insight into that particular process?
No, I think anywhere with well draining soil was you'd have had more predominantly pine and also heather and sort of like that heathland, those heathland characteristics. We don't have any information on that, but you can tell. I mean, I can tell walking around. I know when I'm driving in the car and you'll pass a point in the motorway and I just suddenly realize, like, oh, that's golf country. Yeah. And you just, it's once you see it and you start noticing it, you can't really unsee it. It drives my wife mad. There's a golf course in there.
Golf doesn't have to be everywhere, you know. It's cool when you see those places. I certainly remember being on a trip up in Donegal a couple of years ago, and there's a site not too far away from Dunfanaghy, which would be, as the crow flies, maybe 5 or 6 miles from Rosapenna. And your eyes are out in stalks, even though you're driving the car by yourself. It's like, where's that? Going on Google Maps later on, trying to figure it out. But yeah, when you know, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I'd like to just use this particular juncture to explore a little bit about Abercromby and what you know about him. Obviously, he consulted with Willie Park Jr. in his first few designs at Coombe Hill and Worplesdon, and then updated Cuthbert Butchert's original design at West Byfleet. And interestingly, was the designer at the original Hague golf course at Klingendal, which was the original Royal Hague course, fatally altered by the Atlantic Wall that the German army built along the North Sea coast of continental Europe during World War II. But he was the founder and the benevolent dictator at the Addington, maybe echoes of Crump and indeed Stuart Payton, perhaps. What can you tell us about his involvement there?
It's important to know Abercrombie was the sort of founder at the Addington and putting the investment vehicle together and the finance and that sort of founding membership, the idea. In actually building the golf course, he brought in Harry Colt. So it was the golf course was a Colt Abercrombie collaboration. And it seems like collaboration was a lot more normal back then because, at Coombe Hill, he was working with Willie Park Jr., and then at Worplesdon. So I've heard that at Coombe he was I always forget which way around it was, but basically at one of them it was like Willie Park's job and Abercrombie was kind of just a contractor, and then on another one it was Abercrombie taking a bit more of a lead, and you can sort of see him finding his feet. And then eventually at the Addington, it's his project, but he brings in Harry Colt as a consulting architect, and they work together to route the golf course and build it. But then what's interesting and what's unusual for most golf course architects is that most architects would then go off and, Harry Colt was prolific, designing hundreds of golf courses, and Abercrombie, you could, maybe count on two hands. And he, even with the others that he built, he left like a normal architect. He built them and then walked away. Because the Addington he actually had ownership in, he lived on site. He stayed there until he died in 1935. So he was on site for over 20 years and it was really his baby, and continually tweaking and never leaving and just watching people play the golf course day in, day out and making tweaks where he felt they were needed. And so it was a Harry Colt collaboration for the initial routing and the build. But then after that, the reason why I think Colt was forgotten over the decades was because, other than the records being lost, Abercrombie, it just became synonymous with him because he was the one on site that people would actually meet. I don't know many golf courses that been built where every day you would go and play it. The architect would be there. in the bar. So that would have been quite an unusual and unique situation, but certainly led to him being totally synonymous with the Addington and Colt being forgotten. But then with all these records coming back and being digitized, we've been able to see that Colt certainly had a big part in the design and build of the golf course. But in terms of Abercrombie's sort of traits, I guess, I mean, what we notice on the golf course with the topography is that I think Colt and most architects would most would agree that they would find the par threes first and try and find the most difficult ground to put the par threes over, because it's easier to get someone to go over difficult ground, when you know where they're hitting from and hitting to. Whereas Abercrombie seemed to throw that in the bin really and say, well, we're going to use the dramatic ground for the longer holes. So that's what makes the Addington feel different to other courses, I find, is what I talked about earlier with the topography. It's that though you're getting all of that dramatic topography on par fours and par fives, and then the par threes is still excellent, but it doesn't seem like that was his focus as much as it would have been had it been a sole Colt design.
But the nice thing about using the difficult ground for some of the longer holes is you have those bridges which give real character to the landscape.
Yeah. Well, but you asked about the new course.
Beg your pardon, yes.
Yeah, so 1923, the Abercrombie founded a firm with Tom Simpson, Herbert Fowler, and Arthur Croom. To the Abercrombie, Fowler, Simpson, and Croom that is then one of the two main schools of golf course architecture from the Golden Age in the UK, and they built this second golf course directly over the road from the Addington, which was referred to as the new course. So the one that exists today is the old course. The one over the road was the new course. So that was built in 1923 and then lost to housing just shortly after World War II.
Which was CPO'd, I believe, for £100,000.
Yeah. I think the official CPO went through in 1948. It was taken by the military during the war. And then later by the Council for Housing after the war. But it's by all accounts, it's a more orthodox golf course with sort of generally a flatter site. So more bunkering, just a more of a traditional golf course, whereas the Addington would have been seen as a bit more quirky. You hear pros today talk about Royal St. George's where the ball doesn't stay where you hit it. So you can hit a straight drive. You think it should be in the middle of the fairway and it's sort of bounced over into the rough. And I think the Addington has certainly that because of its topography. Like I said, on the fifth hole, you hit the middle of the fairway and it ends up bouncing left into the trees. So that quirkiness, I think, is also what makes it great fun and interesting. And to try and reduce the amount of times that you have no other option but to hit a shot that's going to end up in the trees. Getting those corridor widths back has been an integral part of the restoration plan.
Maybe if we take a look at Abercrombie's design hallmarks. Now, I ripped this from Jasper Miner's site, so if there's any errors, please direct your ire towards Mr. Miners. So the first one he has is, and maybe looking at it through the prism of the Addington. So Jasper says that one-shot holes are the most memorable and the core of his layouts. Would you agree or disagree?
Yeah, that's the only one I don't think fits the Addington really.
Okay. Because
of what I said about him using the topography for the longer holes. But I would say of all Abercrombie's designs, I think the site at the Addington is probably the most dramatic. So and maybe he was adjusting his approach for this site specifically.
Sparing use of bunkering or none at all. I think you would concur with that.
But again, that goes hand in hand with the topography. So where you use, where there's good land movement, you need fewer bunkers. Like I said, on the new course over the road, flatter site, more bunkers. And I think that's kind of typical for any golf course where if you've got, generally flat site, let's say you go to like Melbourne and play golf over there, I think, they're relatively like heavily bunkered golf courses. Yeah. The Addington's got 37 bunkers. I don't know what Royal Melbourne would have, but I would assume it would be a lot more than that.
Uh-huh. So subtle movements in his green complexes.
Yeah, certainly. That's there's an article by Bernard Darwin for Country Life. I think it was for Country Life, where he talks about the Addington and says it's what a relief it is that we have a golf course that isn't built with these ridiculous mogulled greens, which, like, you know, maybe was a fad at the time. But they talk about how, and this is true, that the Addington's greens they can be very heavily pitched one way to you know, from one side to the other, but they're generally kind of flat within the green. And so you just have this like consistent slope, which just informs a lot of the strategy on which side of the hole you want to be coming in from, especially when the greens are firm. Now, I would have stuck pretty diehard to that, say 5 years ago. But what we've noticed is as we've done the green expansions and gone into the surrounds more, it's, you know, we haven't changed the greens. We've just reclaimed some of these edges that have been lost. And there are some holes like the 15th, for example. People say the 15th is extreme, but it's a 2-tier green. So it's extreme because you have a back tier that's higher and a front tier that's lower.
That's the uphill par 4, yeah.
Yeah, but the tier between, you know, it's separated by a tier of, say, like half a meter with it. So it's a step in the middle of the green. But the 2 tiers are actually dead flat. They're some of the flattest parts of the golf course. So I've always felt 15 is actually like a super flat green, like once you're on the correct tier. And now that we've probably doubled the size of that green by reclaiming what's been lost to the outside. You look at that green now, and it's gone from, you know, these 2 sort of relatively flat tiers to, I mean, it almost looks like the Sitwell green sometimes to my eye. Like, it's just completely mental. There's just stuff all over the place, and new pin positions, and just, you know, run-offs, run-ons. Like, it's yeah, and we haven't changed any of it. And all of that was there. And this is what, you know, CDP and the guys have really taught me, is how much short grass reveals the topography. We haven't reshaped any of that green, and have seen this on every single one of our greens. All we've done is, even without green expansion, just cutting the surrounds down to a shorter height, you know, going from rough to like fairway or surrounds height. And suddenly you're seeing just all this movement everywhere that you didn't even see before. It's not like it wasn't there. It's just now you can see it. And now it's affecting the ball, because instead of rough just holding the ball and it's stopping, you're actually watching the ball roll along that ground movement.
Off on a tangent for a second. You have plans perhaps to extend a par 3 green by, or multiply it by a factor of doubling us, in fact, the size of the green. Which is that, the 12th?
Oh, well, yeah, that one too. But we're doing the 7th this summer. So 7 is going to be, I don't know if we'll get to 100, but it'll be damn near 100-yard long green.
That's the one up and around the corner that you flagged maybe 18 months ago.
Yeah. So 7 is a par 3, and the green site right now is a big half pipe. And it's probably the only bit of the golf course that's actually been changed. It's the other unique thing about the course is a lot of these old golden age golf courses, especially the ones around the world that were successful post World War II and had money. You know, you got to think 30 years of history isn't actually that much. And so none of them, the history in the 1960s of a 1930s golf course wasn't that highly regarded. So you might bring in Robert Trent Jones to come and redesign your golf course for modern golf. And if you had the means, you could do that. And the Addington was just completely forgotten after World War II. So they didn't really have any money, and no one really knew about it anyway. So it was just, and it had the lady that owned it and her family believed that Abercromby was a genius and no one's going to touch the golf course. We're going to protect it. So it was completely preserved. And so what we have now is a golf course with interesting topography where we don't have to make massive distance increases with pushing tees back in order to be more relevant to the modern game, because the topography just has maintained the challenge even without changing anything, even without changing tees, because we're playing the same tees and green locations as we were from when they played with hickories. But it's still relevant today and it still works, and for two reasons. One, because of the topography, which I mentioned, but two, because it must have been the most brutally difficult golf course off the back tees in 1920, because they're playing the same distances. But it's, if you've got the topography, it means you don't have as many bunkers. If you don't have as many fairway bunkers, you don't have to move them to accommodate different distances. Where were we going with that?
I was asking you about the green extensions on 7th.
Oh yeah, so the 7th. The reason I mentioned that is because there is only one main change to the golf course, because its sort of unique preservation has one exception, which is the front right of the 7th green, which was changed in the 1950s. So there's this sort of small window between where Abercromby dies and then the lady that owned it really started ruling with an iron fist. And what they did, it was this big half pipe green where anything left or right would be fed onto the green, like a massive punch bowl. And they, I guess, I've got the committee minutes actually, I think they were saying that you shouldn't be rewarded. If you miss the green, you shouldn't be rewarded by your ball ending up on the green, which is kind of a very sort of penal architecture point of view. And I mean, the golf course is very difficult. So and everybody loves a punch bowl, I think. So we're going to restore that back to what it was, which is really both sides of the hole and the green surrounds feeding the ball onto the green. But what also we found in an old photo is that there's a section of green at the back which is completely lost. And one of the things we noticed, you're talking about Abercrombie sort of design traits. One of the things I've noticed is that there's mounding around every green, but there's sort of gaps in mounds where he did an individual pin extension off the main body of the green, like a little peninsula of a pin, sometimes, just 5 feet wide. The back of the first I'm thinking of is got this tiny little 5 feet wide punch bowl pin position that just sticks out from the main body of the green at the back of the green. The 18th is the same. The 18th in the old areas looks like Mickey Mouse. You've got the main green, and then it's got the two ears, top left, top right, which are these two pin positions that are encapsulated in mounding, that are these tiny little bowls. And that's, as far as I can tell, is I don't know that it's an Abercrombie hallmark across all his courses, but it's certainly something that they did here. And I've come to see that as actually a real leveler between good and bad golfers, because they're often at the back of the green. And if you were a good golfer going for that pin, you've only got to catch it a groove low and be 1 or 2 yards long, and you're going to overshoot the green. And because of the bowl, you're now coming in over a downslope to a short-sided pin. But average golfers basically never miss long. And so if the average golfer is left, right, or short, they're now chipping into what is a bowl for the pin position. So it's only helping you. And the good golfer, missing potentially slightly long, has now got a horrifically difficult chip. So these pin positions I see as like quite a cool equalizer between the good and bad golfer. But anyway, we've got this, we saw this old photo with the back of the 7th green, and we saw one of these little pin extensions. It's on so you got the main green, which is, say, 40, 35 yards long. And at the back of it, there's a big step up, which is currently in the surrounds. And then this little flat pin position at the back of the green on another tier. And when we did some of the tree removal, and you can see the topography around it that you can see in this old black and white photo, you can start getting these marker points and reference points for the back of the green is level with that mound. Okay, let's go and stake that out. And you go and stake it out, and suddenly what you saw in the old black and white photo is this sort of 5 foot long pin position is now 35 yard long section of green. So it's just been flattened by the photo. But once you've got these reference points and actually stake it out, you realize this is basically a whole nother green. And so we did actually find a spring in this section of green. So I think what's happened is they've scrapped it because they couldn't keep it dry. But we're going to be able to deal with that. But we're reintroducing that this summer, and That's probably one of the bits I've been most excited about over the last 5 years, because I don't know any other green like it in the world. It's first off, like I said, the front section is a punch bowl, half pipe, but the back section is also an even bigger punch bowl. So you've got these two punch bowls. It's a double punch bowl green on two separate tiers, and with 100-yard long green at a slight sort of almost 45-degree angle to the playing line. 3 bunkers on the front right protecting the front section of green. So the front section is a smaller target with bunkers, and then the back section, as you go, you're hitting a longer shot, maybe up to 200 yards. You've got no bunkers and a much bigger, broader bowl, so you've got more help for the longer shot and less hurt. But you can go direct to a back pin at 200 yards, or you can hit the start of the back green complex at 165 yards, and the bowl will feed your ball to the back pin potentially. So it's just so much going on there. And I remember hearing Andy Johnson at the Fried Egg talking about having his dream of one day building a double plateau, double punch bowl green. And I'm sort of sat here thinking, well, like, here it is. So anyway, I'm really excited about that. But yeah, you mentioned the 12th. That wouldn't be original. We're kind of sticking religiously, mostly to what's original, and but we did think that the 12th green, with the scale of the hole, and it's like a 500-yard 2-shot hole effectively with a 120-yard wide fairway, and it's there's a lot going on around the green, and we thought the green could potentially be expanded quite a lot to the front, which it wasn't originally. But if we brought the green, the front of the green forward by 30 yards, it's going to sort of triple the size of the green almost. But we think that actually would really work well with the scale of the hole, and would be a really cool addition. But so yeah, there's like the first phase of work, which is architecturally getting back the original, and then there's 1 or 2 spots where we think we could expand the greens a little bit further beyond where they were. And one of the other ones I'm thinking of is Clayton really loves the 17th hole and thinks that, which I agree with, that we should expand the green to the back right. There's these 2 mounds you could expand the green between, which would be very Addington, like a pin position between these 2 mounds to the back right of the 17th green. So that's probably another one we're going to do. But that's like step 3.
Yeah. What step are you on at the moment in that scale?
1.
Okay. But it's a 10-year plan, pretty much. Yeah, you're 5 years in, more or less?
Yeah, I like to say we're 4 to 5 years into an 8 to 10 year plan.
Okay.
So we're, but the broad brushstrokes are, getting towards being done. It's if you'd have asked me 5 years ago, it's still the case, but it was the way I was thinking about it. We've got there's 4 broad phases which can overlap, but the phases were introducing fairway irrigation and generally overhauling the irrigation system. That was something we needed to do. That irrigation system needed to be, well, I'll tell you the 4 phases and we can talk about them individually if you want. But so fairway irrigation, the second one was tree removal. The third one was architectural improvements, bunkering, green expansions, things like that. And the third one was a new clubhouse. So the fairway irrigation needed to happen, but also needed to happen in a way, in my mind, to promote heathland restoration. So rather than having water, a cheaper system would have thrown water out in all directions, whereas really we ended up spending more money trying to get a system which was a lot more efficient and only ever throwing really water in away from the native areas. So we didn't, we focused quite a bit on making sure water isn't entering the native areas, because we want to restore the heathland, and if there's too much water in the native areas, then that heather won't be able to grow. It'll just get out-competed by other grasses. So the tree removal, step 2, is opening up the corridors basically back to where they were, reinstating lost playing lines and all that strategy you get from having the width to create different angles into the greens. And with the topography, it's, I think on a dead flat golf course, there's probably less argument to doing it, but on, with our topography, we need more width to counter the ball moving so much laterally when it hits the ground. And also there's such a different look to certain golf holes when you're on the left side of them versus the right. And that's something I hear Clayton talk about a lot, where, it's a good sign of a strategic golf hole if you've got, if from the left side it looks different than it does from the right. And, we have that in abundance, I think. So the tree removal is to do with that, but it's also what Frank likes to say is you're creating the canvas you're about to paint on. So, we strip everything back to where, we think it needs to be, to then apply what we think the golf course should be on top. It's very difficult to do that with all the trees in the way. So, one example was the fairway irrigation. We, throwing from outside to in is very hard to do if on the edge of the fairway on the outside you've got 50 years of trees growing in. So we had to take away a lot of the trees on the edges of the golf holes just so that we could get the irrigation lines in, and getting them away from an agronomy point of view, trying to grow grass under tree canopies where you've got tree roots also competing for all the water, creating shade and blocking wind. It's just an uphill battle. So the tree removal, to do with strategy and agronomy. And then, like I said, creating the canvas to paint on. And then the painting is the architectural improvement. So that's bunker renovations and green expansions. And that kind of goes hand in hand with agronomy and heathland restoration, getting these areas that with the thinned out tree lines to get the heather back. So with the bunker restorations, we've been keeping told like no one does what we're doing, but we spent quite a bit of time looking at old aerials and GPSing exactly where the old green shapes were. So fortunately, we've got some really good aerial photography that the RAF did during World War II. And with Abercromby only, dying about 3-4 years before the start of World War II, it's a pretty good indication of what he left. And with that, we can GPS all the mowing lines and everything. But with the bunkering, we take those GPS coordinates and we actually plot them out onto the ground, and we can see the original size and shape of the bunker. And I mean, the one thing we don't have is the 3D, so you don't know how deep the bunker was necessarily or how high the mounds were, but you get an idea from the shadows from different aerials. And then we have actually then subsequently got on the ground photos from the 1930s of our golf course and actually the new course. So, that's been part of the project as well, as we've put the word out for what we're doing. Other people have come out and come forward and just been enormously helpful and also, I've said it before, but the digitization of all these archives coming online and being able to search for photographs and word searches for 100 years of newspaper articles and magazine articles. And that's been incredibly helpful with the amount of material now that we have rebuilding our archives, since so much of it was lost. But so the bunkering is like an archaeological project, really trying to get these bunker shapes and sizes back to exactly what they were. And we're probably I said we're sticking to it religiously. We are departing from the original in places where we think it's warranted, but the starting point is the original, and we've set ourselves a very high threshold to cover to justify making changes away from that. And we believe that because of the unique preservation of the golf course, that presenting an authentic heathland golf course would be something that, with the topography, would be a modern, relevant challenge and a unique offering in the golf industry, where there aren't many truly authentic golden age golf courses in the UK, barring maybe the links courses where they just haven't had any tree growth. 4-step plan, what was it? Tree removal was architecture improvements, and then clubhouse. So the original golf course had the clubhouse in the middle of the site. The course was designed in 1913. The clubhouse was designed but never built because World War II happened. Then there's rationing. They never built the clubhouse. early 1920s. There's still rationing, and before the rationing ends and they get to build the clubhouse that they want, the idea of the second golf course over the road is happening. So they then thought, well, there's no point in putting the clubhouse in the middle of the first site because it's going to be miles away from this second golf course. They'd been temporarily using this site for clubhouse at the bottom of the hill. Let's just formalize that, and it's equidistant between the two golf courses. So that changed the routing of the original old course, because that course was designed to start from the center of the site from the current fifth hole. And we have documents and articles in Country Life proving that is what they wanted to do, and you can feel it on the golf course as well. Like you didn't have driving ranges back then. You have the gentle handshake, the warm up that you would have on the golf course, and then the stern finish at the end, because that's how they built golf courses. And you're now starting on what was meant to be the 15th hole, so you've got a brutally difficult golf course for 5 holes, and you can kind of you can really feel the change of pace. You play the first 4 holes, and then let's say you get to the 6th, and 6 through 17 just feels like a different golf course. And that's probably a fair critique that people have had over the years of the golf course. But when you start on the 5th, you don't sense that at all. Those finishing 4 or 5 holes, what is now 1 through 4, they feel like a very natural progression to the earlier holes of everything's not quite as dramatic on the topography. Everything's stretching out in distance, and you're trying to see your way home really at that point. Like the 3rd hole gets a lot of complaints at the moment. It's a very, very difficult golf hole, 210-yard uphill into the wind par 3 with the most severe green on the golf course. And I'm convinced that as a 17th, it doesn't irritate people quite as much because, well, you've either played crap up to that point, you don't care, or you're playing well and you're going to show it respect. But as a 3rd hole, everybody's expecting to make 3, and the strokes gained for like what is a 240-yard shot on the PGA Tour is 3.8. So if I sit there and tell my members if they make 4, 5 times out of 5, they're 0.2 strokes off the world's best players. They don't want to hear that. It says par 3 on the scorecard. I meant to make a 3. So yeah, I think some of those issues on the golf course will with the rerouting really, really improves the golf course. But there's no surprise that's how they built it. So moving the clubhouse to the center of the site. The clubhouse right now is effectively the artisans' clubhouse they moved into in the 1950s when the clubhouse burnt down. And moving the clubhouse, we need a new clubhouse anyway because of the state of the existing one, but because it's quite old now and it was never really meant to be a permanent occupation. But the main reason for that is to reinstate the original design principles of the golf course, with starting on the 5th and finishing on the 4th.
So you're 5 years in, as you said. If you could talk to Ryan Noades and go back in time, what advice would you proffer to your younger self at the start of this particular adventure?
I haven't really thought about that. What would I say to myself if I knew what I know now? It's hard. I mean, there's certainly just things we might have done in different orders or different ways. Just knowing, I mean, there's 110 years of old pipe work, clay pipe drainage, all original in the ground. And when we put the irrigation in, they mole plowed all the pipes, and all these old drainage lines were hand dug. And drainage today, you'd probably put in at 650, 750 mil deep, and it would be below the irrigation. You'd mole plow the irrigation at like 450, 550. So in theory, you could mole plow irrigation over the top of existing drainage and it should be fine. But our irrigation mole plowing went through and broke all the old clay pipe drainage, which, unbeknownst to us, a lot of it was still working. So we had dry fairways that suddenly had random wet spots, just the size of a car would just be sodden, because you'd have this 110-year-old clay pipe that was moving water, and suddenly it's got a break in it, and all that water's just pumping up into one very, very localized area. So yeah, that was a bit of a learning curve where we sort of having to go and hand dig and repair all these old clay pipes. But I I don't know if we could achieve what we did today if we started again today, just because the regulations with, tree removal and things like that, everything seems to have got a lot stricter over even in the last 5 years. But no, I don't know that I would change much. I think it would just be a more efficient job because, we'd be able to actually project manage everything, knowing exactly all the little skeletons that are buried in the ground.
Obviously, at the start of the process, you had to convince the family and to treat the Addington in a different manner to other properties. How did you go about making that particular case?
Like, that was probably a slow burn. It was just remarking. I mean, we all knew we had something special. It was more, we were also doing a lot of it in-house. It was really more of, I don't think anybody disagreed with what we were trying to do because we were already doing it. I think, so it's probably a bit unfair to say that it was some massive change of direction. What the change was we decided we were going to do something in 5 years as opposed to 20, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And that was really just a decision where, everybody knew we had a good, successful group of golf courses, and I suppose the argument was that we would be probably benefited by diversifying a little bit, where the Addington had the potential to be something higher end and more premium, and our other golf courses, would be more sort of middle market. The incentive and the ambition in the family was always to see the Addington be as good as it can be. I think it was just a shift in timelines, really. Like I said, it was trying to do something in a much shorter period of time, which is what everybody agreed to. So it was sort of pushing an open door in a sense.
And you've alluded to obviously how central the reinstatement of your archive. Obviously, because of the fire in 52, a lot of the materials and original materials would have been lost. I'm interested just to know what advice you might extend to club historians that may be listening. What's the best way to find or re-find what was lost, or indeed what has yet to be found?
You can certainly do a lot with a subscription to the Times, because it gives you access to the Times archive. But that is a starting point. Might give you an idea about what's there. But I think the thing that's probably helped the most is just publicly people knowing that you're doing what you're doing, because so much of what we have has come from other people. If people know that you're doing this, then you've got amateur archivists, like Simon Haynes. Not that he's amateur anymore, but I'm sure he's probably consulting on a number of clubs, I would have thought. And Jasper was doing it, and you got Lee Patterson, and it's just that I think there's so much help that we've had. If we'd never told anybody what we were doing, I'm sure none of those people would have even known to contact us or send us anything. So I think one thing would be like a bit of a PR job to just be public and get your name out there to say, we're excited about doing this thing. We're about trying to investigate our history. But yeah, I would also say slowly catch your monkey. It's a bit of a trap, I think, to say you're going to book your day in the National Archive or the National Library and go and sit there for an hour or 6 hours and you'll uncover everything. I think you just have to, open up a Dropbox account and decide that every single thing you see you're going to save, and how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It's you just have to chip away at it, because this stuff just seems to. We've been doing this like 6 years now, and it's even now, like I said, a month ago, I was sent about 250 photos on the ground of the old course and the new course, all taken in 1930.
Which you'd not seen before?
No.
Amazing.
Where the hell have they been?
They were sitting in some attic.
It was
somewhere.
also by accident. It was like not someone in golf. They were writing a biography about some person and found that they'd had these photos in their wardrobe or something. I don't know. It's just it's a long process, and it never ends. But people have to know that you're doing it to be able to help you.
And talking about those pictures from bygone days, I believe you have reinstated a lost green and what has turned into a new hole, perdu, lost in French, which is a phenomenal nomenclature, I have to say.
Yeah, well, I think you can thank Sam and Tom at Cookie Jar for that. They were part of the brainstorming session on WhatsApp where we were trying to decide what to call it. The 12th hole, for anyone that doesn't know, it's like a 400-500 yard par 5 today, but I mean, amazingly back then it was a 2-shot hole without any heather. So to about, I don't know how far it is. Let's say 80 yards to the left of the current green. We've got a photo showing the hole being played to a green. Well, it's during construction actually, so I don't ever think it was in play, but the green essentially was 80 yards to the left of where it is now. So it was less of a straight hole, more of a dogleg round to the left. And we always wanted to reinstate that green. We never wanted to reinstate it for the 12th hole because it was scrapped during construction for a reason, and we believe it was scrapped because the routing was worse with that green. So the idea was, I think we talked about it a lot, but the idea was that we were going to play it as a par 3 from a tee that was off the back of the existing 9th green, and that if you were going to play that green, that is now 110 yards away into the woods, to get to then the 10th tee, which you normally would have gone to after the 9th, obviously, you're now playing this par 3 in between 9 and 10. To get back to the 10th hole, you'd have to walk 150 yards back the way you came, along the par 3, which obviously we didn't want to do. So the idea was the 10th is a short par 4, and that we were going to turn the whole carry and tee complex of the 10th hole into an extended section of fairway, so that you could hit to that from the new par 3 green, and that when playing that par 3, that subsequent 10th hole would become a longer, instead of a 340 yard par 4, it's a 520 yard par 5. But I did have my reservations on that, and Clayton and Frank and Mike De Vries were always trying to convince me that it was worthwhile. I didn't have any reservations about the par 3, but I was really worried that we were trying to shoe in the par 5 afterwards just to make the par 3 work, and that there wasn't enough space to do it. And I mean, Mike De Vries absolutely smashed that one out of the park. I think the reason it works, because two things. We're playing a par 3, we're playing a green that was designed to be a par 5. Now 110 yards, so from a different distance and from a different angle, and it's great. And we're playing a par 5 without changing the second half of the hole that was designed to be a 300 and something yard par 4. And I think the reason they both work so well is because the par 3 was really meant to be played with a wedge, because you were hitting into it, and with hickories you'd be hitting a 100-yard shot into that green. And the angle change on a shot that far doesn't really make a huge amount of difference. And there's a lot of undulation in the green. So it's created this huge green with no bunkers with a lot of movement in it. So you've got, as Clayton likes to say, it's big green, small targets. There's like greens within the green. And so that works on the par 3. And then the par 5 version of this short 4 works because I think if you play the appropriate tee, the short 4 is really asking you how much risk do you want to take on the tee shot in attacking the green or not. And that's really the same process you go through on the second shot on the par 5. Assuming you put your drive in the fairway, you're left with that same decision of how aggressively do I want to play into this green and how much risk do I want to take. And then the green is sort of designed for that, where it's quite severe if you miss left, right, or long. But it's a relatively straightforward hole if you laid up and wanted to play off the 300-yard tee, like drive a wedge. But when you've got 250 into that green, you're left with a lot of the same decisions as you are having 280, 290, 300 off the tee with a driver. So yeah, it's I find it incredible, but also for the reasons I explained, not that coincidental, but incredible that we got these holes that are being played in the way that they weren't designed, and yet work so well. So yeah, it's not is one of the sort of my requirements for doing it, was that it's not taking away anything from the existing routing. So while I said Purdue, that new par 3 is between the 9th and 10th, that's not a permanent change. What we're doing is we have 2 different routings, so you can still play the course, the original routing. You go to the 9th green, you play that, you go to the 10th tee, which is like in the fairway of this new par 5, and you play the 10th as it was designed to be, as a short par 4, or you play the new par 3 after the 9th hole, and then the 10th becomes a par 5. So that new routing with the new par 3, we're calling the Colt course, and the original routing without the new par 3 or par 5 is called the Abercromby course.
It's a fascinating video, actually, with you giving some commentary on the sowing procedure for the Purdue green. I believe you use Poa green cores from the other greens out in the golf course. I'm just interested to understand how that works and what the advantages are.
Yeah, it's different to our American counterparts, where they seem to rebuild their, at least the bent and Bermuda greens. They rebuild them every 10 years or so, but in the UK, it's always seemingly a badge of honor for the old courses to say our greens are the original, 100-plus-year-old greens. And that's certainly something we have at the Addington. And we were concerned that, you can't buy Poa seed, not this, like a traditional Poa that's been mown short for 100 years mutates into something which is actually a really great surface for golf. And the concern was, how are we going to replicate that on a new green? And so we spent a lot of time with our aggregate suppliers trying to find the right mix of soil and sand to make sure that it drained, but that it didn't drain too fast, because you didn't want a USGA spec green that would just perform completely differently to the rest of the golf course, because these are old soil push-up greens, which, I believe the best greens in the world are traditional soil push-up greens that have been top dressed with sand and treated well for the last 10, 20 years, because you end up with something I think like is a bit more fertile, but it still drains properly. Whereas, I often find USGA greens, for whatever reason, don't perform in my mind as good as the very, very best push-up greens that have been looked after. So anyway, that's an aside. But so we looked a lot at how to make sure that the green felt like a green from the rest of the golf course. So the root zone was one thing, as I explained, and then the other thing was the grass. And we didn't want to buy grass in, because how we were going to replicate it? We didn't want to have seed. And anyway, so we'd looked at some other. Greg Evans was our consulting agronomist a few years ago, and he had been involved in some chipping green constructions where they'd use cores from their greens on the golf course to lay over the root zone and essentially establish the grass from those cores that would be the same grass as they have on the golf course. So that's what we did. The other, the gold standard for this would be to have a nursery that you build from cores. So basically every August or April, you go in and, you might spike the greens as part of the aeration process. And one of the ways you can spike is with a hollow spike that would remove a core of material, and with that you get the little tuft of grass on the top. So we actually lay those cores out over the sand soil mix that we built the green out of, and then you water it and the grass grows. So so thanks. That's what the
that's 2 Scaramucci's.
So yeah, that's what that was the plan. The gold standard for this would be to do that on a nursery green, and then you've got a very large nursery green that you've established from cores from your own golf course. It's the same grass, but then once the nursery green's established, you can then take strips of turf off the nursery green and use, actually lay turf on a new green that you want to build. So we are working towards that. We've started to establish our own nursery green last year, and this is going to be useful for the green expansions and things, where instead of buying turf in or having to use the core method, which takes quite a long time to establish. We can just go and strip turf off our nursery green and lay it straight out, and within, if it's in the season, within a few weeks you can be playing on it. So that's kind of the story behind the core.
Are you ever not thinking about the Addington
when I'm sleeping?
Yeah. Yeah, it's that infectiousness. It's remarkable.
I'm worried I'm going to be boring everyone.
No. Look,
cause.
Look. I'm entertained anyway, so that's all that matters for right now. So, look, you alluded to your bunker renovations and doing it a little bit differently. I think you did bunkering between 9 and 12 during August 2024. Now, historically, and in most normal places, bunker renovations are carried out during wintertime.
Yeah.
But you've decided to go completely arse about tit and do them during the summer. I'm just wondering what the rationale for that was, and perhaps what the benefits might be in adopting that approach.
Yeah, so we and like I said, we always used to do winter work in-house, and that's the reason why people do it. And a lot of the members clubs do it, even if they bring in contractors during the winter, because the idea is there's no club comps, or the main events are through the season. The winter, it's quieter, there aren't as many golfers. But with that comes softer ground. In the UK in the winter, obviously it rains a lot more, and there's 2 points and problems with that. Is the scale of the job that we were undertaking meant that there was a potential for an enormous amount of damage and disruption if we were going to try and do so much in so little time. That's compounded by the fact that in the winter, you get, in the darkest days, you're probably at 7.5 hours of daylight. And in the summer, in the middle of June, I think the longest day is close to 17 hours. So you're getting an extra 10 hours a day of daylight in the summer, which is effectively, if you've got the right contractors that are willing to do it, you're more than doubling your amount of time that they can actually be working. So doing something in the winter, the project takes longer because the days are shorter. It's a lot more damaging to the golf course. All of that can be managed if it's a relatively small scale job, if you're redoing some bunkers or whatever. But if you're doing as much as we wanted to do, it was going to cause a lot of damage. Even if the damage was manageable, the other problem is that with the heather, one of our key objectives for this project is to restore the heathland to the site. It's a fundamental part of the golf course that we believe is crucial to ending up with what we want to end up with. And once you churn up the ground by basically just driving over soft ground in the winter, you often find that it'd be really difficult to get the heather back. If you go we had some areas in the beginning where we had a bit of a cock up where we just did some work when the ground was too soft, basically. And there's like this patch of ground that was churned up a bit by tires that was then remediated. It was smoothed out, but it's just all broadleaf grasses. It's no heather coming back through it. So it's a lot of effort now to get that back to being a native, dry sort of heathland. And that's the thing we wanted to avoid as well over the whole golf course. So the other point is recovery. So whenever you do any work, if you are doing tees or bunkers in the winter for a normal golf course or drainage or whatever, let's say they do that work in October, and you do it in a way with boards and things, so you're driving over boards and you're not doing too much damage to the golf course, and you can get in and out without causing damage. Great. The thing's finished. It's roped off as GUR probably until April because there's no grass growth. So the other point was recovery, where, Purdue, for instance, we put the cores down on the 1st of August. And I think, you could have putted on that green 3 weeks later. And that's the other point, that if you're going to do cores, let's say I built Purdue in the winter. Well, we knew we wanted to use cores to populate the green. well, we're only going to core on the 1st of April, the 1st of August, and we don't core that aggressively in April if we do. So the green had to be ready for the 1st of August. So you'd have either built the green in the winter and then wait until the 1st of August to take the cores, which would have been ridiculous because all the rain and stuff would have just potentially washed away all the shaping because you're just looking at bare sand and earth. So once you get the grass established, it really protects all your shaping because it prevents erosion from the rain. So, that's another point. But yeah, it's about having firm ground to be able to drive over the golf course when you need to. And it's about having longer days to be more efficient. And it's about better recovery because you've got the warmth. And, maybe that's not a good long-term strategy because, you might not want to do that in perpetuity. You definitely don't, because people just get sick of it because it's like, well, every time we want to play the golf course, there's work going on. But it was to do with that mindset shift of doing things in a shorter period where, look, this is now a restoration project. There's a start and not that it's ever going to be finished necessarily, but we are in a phase of concerted effort towards this restoration project. And so we are willing to forego, or accept a little bit of disruption during the summer in order to facilitate that project. It's not something that you would do with your kind of ongoing improvements for 40 years. But yeah, over a 5-year period, it was something we were willing to do. It was a massive improvement for the project, being able to get a lot more done in shorter periods. And I think I'd say we're probably entering into a phase where we're still working in the summer, but we're making a lot more effort now to make sure that we have 18 holes open with less disruption. So since Purdue opened last year, this now gives us the opportunity where our work on the golf course is now being planned with using Purdue in mind, so that we're only really ever on one hole at a time, and that hole's finished before then we go on to the next bit of work. So we're going to quite a lot of effort this summer when we're doing the 7th, that we're doing the 7th in isolation. The 7th is closed. You'll walk from the 6th green to the 8th tee, and then we add Purdue so that you've still got 18 holes. So that doing Purdue and getting that done is now opening up a lot of doors for the project going forward in sort of alleviating some of that disruption that people will have sensed over the last 3 or 4 years.
You mentioned the heather regeneration. How is that particular element coming along?
So everywhere we've done it, I think we're on our 3rd phase now. Everywhere we've done it, it's been enormously successful. So part of the tree removal, and this is another reason for doing it through the summer, because we just couldn't have conceivably boarded and protected all the traffic routes. But part of the tree removal is that we had 70 years of leaf litter dropping on the ground and smothering what, was this kind of mineral layer of where this heather would be able to grow.
And changing the soil composition, presumably, as well.
Yeah. Right? So after the trees came out, where they did come out, we had a team go in with very expert shapers, really, kind of massively overqualified for tree removal, but they were scraping off very delicately and accurately a sort of very precise depth of leaf mulch buildup, trying to get back to that mineral layer, which itself is in places only 1/2 an inch thick. So if you go through it, then you've kind of ruined it. So you need to get down to it, but no deeper. So that was a bit of a painstaking process, and also creates an enormous amount of material, because all this leaf mulch is like compost, basically. You're just taking off the golf course. So, thousands and thousands of tons worth of material that we're removing off the golf course. And so that was the first step: remove the leaf mulch buildup, get back to that mineral layer. Then that creates, talking about creating the canvas, that is the subsoil, or whatever you want to call it, the layer which we want to put the heather seed on. So we're working with one donor site in particular at the moment in Sussex, where it's run by a charity, but we pay to manage a lot of their sites. So part of the heathland management is that you'd want to cut it regularly. Heather has this life cycle, and that's sort of part of managing and prolonging that life cycle. But in cutting it, we're allowed to collect the cuttings. So we use a machine that collects as it cuts. So that collection, if it's done at the right time of year, will have the seed in it, and then we transport that seed back to our site and spread it over the ground. That's usually done in November, December, and you want to do it after the seed pops, generally after that first hard frost. And the seed sits there until we've seen it germinate pretty consistently when you get warm, wet weather. And we've now, the right side of the 16th was the one we did first. I think we did that in November 2021. And that's like a blanket of kind of nursery crop heather at the moment. And so there's a bit of work to get it to be, like proper established heathland. And we're having some trouble with gorse invading it, because we can't just spray that off because you'd kill the heather. So we're having to go in by hand and remove all these little gorse plants repeatedly until the heather's got this blanket cover where it can be its own sort of weed suppression. But yeah, it's been really impressive. I mean, that was one of the worries, is you ask 10 people how to grow heather and you get 10 different answers. And it seems like you could ask 10 people on our site, and each site would be completely different. Each part of the site would be completely different. Look, it's not like we've half-assed it. We've put a hell of an amount of time into coming up with different techniques and methods to try and get the best hit rate we can. But it's been really great to see that, because you put it down in November and then you just basically wait at that point. Like once you've done everything you can do, you're just hoping for the right weather. But it's been really, really reassuring just to see how good the soil is for it, because there's a lot of sites you'd put it down and even if you did everything right, it's not going to grow because the soil's not right. But here it's, it certainly seems like we've got a leg up on trying to get the heather established. So, the goal is to never lose a ball. So, my philosophy with heather is that it can be cut. I think heather can be cut a lot shorter than people give it credit for. And I think people baby it too much. And this is certainly what we've seen and we've learned, that, we feel like we can do better than other places because we're starting from scratch, because you can't cut heather past a certain point without killing it. And that's usually, if you let it grow too long, you've raised that height below which you can't cut it without killing it. Because we're starting from scratch, from germination, that height is effectively ground level so long as we keep on top of it. If you went to, say, an established heathland golf course and their heather was a foot high, you could probably only take a couple of inches off that. It's still going to be 10 inches high, so it's still going to lose your ball. So our ambition is that we end up with lean native heathland roughs that are playable, where you find your ball. And it's cliche, but you're getting that sort of half shot penalty.
You'll probably recall Frank Pont talking about the Ullaberg golf site just near the Links Valley in the east of Holland. The Links Valley is Frank's reversible 9-hole golf course, but the Ullaberg is right beside it, which is actually fully a heather golf course, and you play on heather apparently. I haven't seen it, but
I don't think people believe that. But I've not been there in person. I've seen the photos, but the tees and fairways. I'm pretty sure the greens aren't heather.
I don't think so. But the thing is, the pictures, it doesn't look like heather that you're playing off.
No. Well, it's like any plant. People say heather doesn't like water. That's nonsense. People say heather doesn't like fertility. That's nonsense. What we're learning is that heather likes all of those things. It's just that if you give it those things, it will be out-competed by other grasses. Yeah. But in isolation, it thrives on those things, but it's just other things thrive quicker. So you're doing this dance to try and help it, but not help other things. And I think with the cutting as well, like if you cut grass grows faster. So that's what I think some people don't realize, is that the shorter you cut grass, the harder it will grow. And that's like a recovery mechanism. The more damage you do, the more it will try to repair itself. And heather's the same. If you let heather, if you leave it untouched, you will get one long leggy stalk that's really tall and woody. If you cut it short from the beginning, it proliferates out sideways and sends out more shoots to the side to try and get denser, more and more shoots to try and grow past where it's been cut. So you end up with this dense blanket rather than a single long plant, which, is not great for golf.
I have a feeling I'm jumping in the weeds here, but how do you cut heather? Is it a modified mower of some description, or is it a specific heather cutting machine?
You can cut it with a mower, but usually what we're trying to do when we're cutting it, and it's really to do with any native as well with the roughs, is if it's grass or heather, we're trying to remove fertility as much as possible to keep it lean. And so the important thing to do when we're cutting is to collect. So we generally use machines you can use like a rotary deck or like a more of a flail deck, which would be more of like a cylinder action. But we are essentially, the important thing is that we're trying to collect when we cut it. And it does two things. It removes the fertility for any of the grasses or things that you're cutting, but it also allows you to collect the seed. But yeah, not essential, but you could go over it with a rough mower and it would cut it. You do have to be careful with that, because if you continually cut it with a cylinder deck, and we're still trying to learn exactly what the sort of threshold with this is, but there's arguments that you would encourage it to start lying over. Now, I'm sure you might have seen that, where you get heather that is quite low to the ground, but you can see it's almost just growing sideways, and it's just like really leggy and woody. And that's actually a long plant that's just not standing up. It's just been pushed over. So that's not what you want either, because it just ends up getting too dense. So cutting in different directions and varying that year to year and trying to collect the cuttings. We're getting into the weeds.
We are, but I guess it's stuff that you never knew that you knew you needed to know.
Well, yeah, that's a never-ending list.
Yeah, but apropos that, there's as people would probably appreciate listening to this, if you're still with us, there's no stone left unturned at Shirley Church Road, and one of those things is one of the things you pointed out to me actually in 2023 was your photography discs at certain locations around the golf course, and I believe you've had David Cannon, the world-renowned photographer, on a number of occasions. He comes in every year, yeah. So the specific positions marked on all holes to ensure consistency of sight lines and just double check what you're doing on a yearly basis, yeah.
Yeah, so every October and occasionally other times through the year. But what this is from Clayton, really. He was involved in Kingston Heaths and many others, but he sort of cited Kingston Heath as a restoration that they'd done. And his one regret and I don't know whether he'd say regret, but anyway, the thing he said that the only thing he ever thought that, maybe they could have done better was just taking more photos. And of like the before and during and after. So one of the things we did at the very beginning was to go out, get David to photograph the whole golf course. And I knew that I didn't want to sort of lose the position where the photos were taken, because as the tree removal happens and corridors change, you never really get the same photo. So we marked, I think there's about 80 of them over the golf course. They're these red discs that are in certain locations that David basically once a year will come and take a photo from that location. And we've got this document that details the location, the lens size, and also whether the photo's taken from his pole or not, because he's got this long pole as well. And there's usually like quite a few photos from the same spot. So we end up every year with a catalogue of the golf course and the changes, and I think, to be honest, most of it would be used internally, and at the end what we'll probably use the most is the very first and the very last. And it's funny, on some of them, like the playing lines change so much that when he takes a photo now, it looks quite silly, because he's like, if he's pointing it at the center where it was pointed 5 years ago, it's like, why is he looking over there?
Skewed one way or the other, yeah.
There's almost now like two versions of it, where there's like, well, this is where it was facing, and now this is where we'd like.
But that's what happens when you increase your fairway width from 25 yards to 70.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, just a couple of questions with regard to the future before we get on to the perennial final two questions. Do you think you'll do a book to mark the project's evolution over time?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're actually. I mean, there's two parts to that. One is the kind of goal, and it might be the same book. I don't know. Ask me in 5 years, but yeah, we're working with Richard Pennell to just document a lot of the. So much of the club's history is just anecdotal at this point. It's just like just people in their older years that played there or knew people there or had parents that were there, or a lot of them even have photos, and it's just interviewing those people and getting as much information as possible while we can, and then hopefully come up with like a pretty well researched book about the history of the club, which is quite unusual and hopefully interesting, even if it's just for the people at the club that want to read it. And then the other side of it is, like you said, is documenting the work, which is something I've seen. I've been, whenever I see a club kind of restoration book, I usually try to buy it so that I've got it on my shelf and see all the examples of. I'm just looking at the Prairie Rainer at the moment, by John Moran, but I mean, I'd love to produce a book like that. It's a beautiful book.
That's the Chicago Golf Club one, yeah?
Yeah. So, yeah, that's definitely on the cards. But it's also just for posterity. I mean, if none of this stuff ever is public, then I don't really mind that. I think one of the things that we all wish during these projects is if that person had just taken a bit more time to take a photo or write down why they did this or what the decision-making process was with that. It's all helpful. And I think, maybe that'll never happen again because, with podcasts and technology now, it's all recorded. But I do think we take for granted, like whether you actually write down like why you made a decision one day and how you log that. So yeah, it's also for posterity.
Yeah, memory can be an unusual thing. Sometimes you remember things wrong.
We might all like to revise why we made certain decisions.
Oh, for sure. And you tend to if you repeat the mistake in terms of your own memory, you start believing the mistake that you've made. So, yeah, so it's useful to codify these sort of things. Right. What's left? I mean, you beat me to the question earlier on. I mean, it will never truly be finished, really. It's an iteration of the 0.1% at some point in time, yeah.
Yeah, you are. I mean, we're not quite at the 1% gains yet, but that's where it gets to, is you're just pursuing the 1% gains. But I read in Ben Cowan-Doer's, there was a book on Cabot. There's a magazine actually, and he said he sees himself as a collector of ideas. And I'd never really thought about it that way, but that's pretty much how I operate. There's no. I heard Bledge once say, you're just copying everybody. There's no original ideas. And it's just, I guess, we're trying to create the best version of the golf club that we can. And you're always seeing things that other people are doing where you can push yourself further. And I think that's always been my argument as to why I think we can do more and go further than others, and why I think in the end we'll hopefully have something really, really, truly special, because the other clubs run by committees have a bottleneck, and we can implement things faster and more boldly, whether it's green expansions going further, fairway expansions, height of cut, or heather being cut short, and whatever it is, we can do it. I think more effectively and quickly because of the way that we're run. We're a family-owned business. There's no committee there is a members committee, but it ultimately the buck stops with the family and the board running the business, and me at the end of the day being appointed by them to do that. And I sort of like the parallels with Abercromby, and it's there was one person in charge, and I think isn't that what Mackenzie said? As a committee should be an odd number and fewer than three, and that's. I think there's a lot of merit to that. It's I think was it General Patterson who was like, the perfect plan is pointless if it's poorly executed. I'd rather rather have a poor plan that's aggressively executed. But not that this is a poor plan, but there's a lot to be said for being able to move quickly and make the decisions in a way that's not bottlenecked by the lowest common denominator, which is inevitable when, if you ask 20 people what you want to do, you just get a watered down version of what should have happened, which, I think we're going to present the antithesis of that process.
Yeah, I recall the conversation I had with the Greens chairman in De Pan in Utrecht the year before last. And he said to me, with regard to their view on, ongoing courseworks and so on and so forth, he says, you must not zig, because zigging is very expensive. And in typical Dutch form, they audit the shit out themselves. So if they do make a mistake, they just damn well make sure they don't make that mistake again. But, you mentioned the members there. How would they find the process?
I mean, if they tell me, if they would...
what are they telling you anyway?
What they're telling me is generally, everybody seems to be behind the project. I think, I think also, I'm not going to lie and say it probably is a relief to some of them now that we're kind of, moving towards this phase where we're, like I said, with Purdue, we can work on one hole at a time and start to limit the amount of disruption on the rest of the golf course. But we were really lucky with COVID actually, because we appointed CDP in 2019, I think like September or something. We were their first client. They just announced the partnership, and we put together we were going to have a members Q&A. So the three guys, I think, were going to be on site in Croydon, meeting the members. And that was like, I think it was beginning of March or something. It might have been like the 20th of March, 2020. And so we were going to have this Q&A and do like a 8-week consultation. We'd produce this master plan booklet of everything we wanted to work towards long term. And then COVID happened, 23rd of March until, was it 7th of May, we were locked down in the UK. We were allowed out 1 hour a day. Kind of crazy thinking that was like 5 years ago. And what it meant was basically everything got paused. I mean, in the fullness of time, we learned that COVID was fantastic for the golf industry. But at the time, everything just got shelved, and we didn't really... It basically meant we had like a year of consultation where the master plan had been produced. We'd had a Q&A. The guys ended up not coming down. I think we did it I think we might have done it via Zoom. We certainly had a Q&A with the members. But it meant that we'd given the members the master plan, and they had, I'm going to say it was like 9 to 12 months, like before we really even started any work, which ended up being, really helpful and gave people a lot of time to digest what we were talking about. And then the other thing I would say is that if you're going to do a bit of tree removal, it might really irritate people because they don't really see why you're doing it. Whereas with the topography at the Addington, when you do enough in one go, because the goal was to do it properly with the proper licenses and bring in proper contractors so we can just do it on a larger scale to have everything done more quickly rather than doing it over 30 years. You're not just seeing one tree cut down, you're seeing a whole bunch cut down, and then you actually immediately from day one to day two, you can see the landscape that might have been revealed in the distance or the width of the hole that just doubled. And so you're changing the pace of the project where someone turns up the next day and they can actually see it and go, oh, wow, I get it. I didn't know that was there. Whereas if you'd have done 10% of it every year for 10 years, they don't see it until year 11, by which time they probably got bored and left. So yeah, the two things, the consultation, COVID kind of helped us. And then also, I think those early days, we'd built up a lot of goodwill over 15 years of doing work in-house, taking some trees out, doing some improvements where inevitably there's resistance. But every time, like I said, people would see the benefit on the back end. And it did get to the point, even before we started this project, where when we would do work in 2016, 17, 18, 19, I remember conversations where there were even the most kind of outspoken members against anything we would do. They would take me aside and say, I don't agree with it, but you've never been wrong on this before, so we trust you. We will reserve judgment until it's finished, and that was really refreshing. And we'd spent 15 years building up that goodwill, so it was kind of a merging of a whole bunch of factors where we built up a lot of goodwill. There'd been an extra long consultation, and then you come out of COVID and everybody was just basically happy to be out there, and they didn't even care what it was, because it was, we'd all been locked down. And so it was kind of this like perfect storm for us to the timing. You couldn't have planned it any better, really. And then now that people have seen the fruit of it and see how good the golf course is getting, and can really see the vision for having done a lot of that work in a shorter period, they're all really behind it, and they all seem to love it, as far as I know. I think from my point of view, the next bit is, once we've got the heather established and the native areas as where we want them, then the course is going to be sensational. But yeah, in terms of I think you might have asked what's next earlier, maybe before we started.
Yeah, what's next?
You were, it was, so this last phase, most of the bunkers are rebuilt, but a lot of it's going to be to do with tees and shaping. So the tees are kind of these like big built up pads, which you never really noticed when they were in the trees, but now the tree lines are kind of all thinned out. You can see these pads across the landscape. Like maybe I shouldn't say it because no one will notice it if I don't, but it's like, I always notice, you stand, just as just an example, you stand on the fourth tee, and 400, 500 yards away, you can see the back of the fifth tee. And it just stands out because you've got this very natural landscape, and then you've got this big square block that just breaks the horizon line. And the thing that we're trying to work to is that all of the surrounds flow into the subsequent tees, and that none of the tees you can really see like from a distance. They don't disrupt that landscape. And those are actually quite big jobs, because they're sort of a bit more marginal gains, but because a lot of people would say, well, the teeing surface is fine, but the eighth tee, for example, is a big built up pad, but they're very ugly, and they also disrupt the previous green's surrounds. So yeah, that's the next phase of the project, other than the sort of green expansions, is to try and get these tees to be shaped properly. And with that, introduce some forward tees where it's one of my sort of pet peeves is that the ladies' tees seem to be just put right in front of the men's, whereas, the rule of thumb is they should be playing about 75% of the distance. So on a 400-yard hole, their tee should be at 300. Well, you very rarely see a tee 100 yards in front of the men's tee. So yeah, we're thinking very carefully about that, and then also introducing some back tees where we think there should be some variety on the holes in terms of distance. And I think our philosophy there is generally lengthen the longer holes, not the short holes. That's always a trap. I think I see people maybe that don't know so much about golf course architecture, but they would often say, oh, that hole's only 300 yards, you could add 100 yards to it. But I mean, the short holes are interesting because they're short, and the Addington's got an enormous number of half par holes, which is what makes the course so fun. I think you've got like the 12th, I said, is like a 500-yard hole, but with the downslope, basically you can get there in two shots. And there's 440-yard par fours, which are all kind of like half par holes, 230-yard par three, 210-yard par three. Those are, with hickories, they're like 3.5s. And I think to try and maintain that like half par, you could have a 250-yard par three, and we're not going to play them there from every day, but play them from there every day. But I do think that's where the interesting stuff happens, where you're kind of at a distance where you're thinking, do I attack the green or not? And so that's some of the stuff we'd like to do with doing the tees and creating these different tee locations, is having, with Purdue and these two routings, is being able to do a bit of like an LACC and sort of create a course within a course where, on different days there, you could have a very, very different experience where, I mean, the 13th hole is going to have everything from 150 yards all the way up to 270 yards, which, is that a par 3? Is it a par 4? It's my answer is it doesn't really matter. It's a great hole. Figure it out.
So you're going to be busy anyway, by the sounds of it. Listen, returning listeners will know we always finish this with the same concluding questions. The penultimate one looks at some of your bucket list courses. You can interpret the question however you wish. There may be places you've already played or have yet to visit. The choice is yours. Please tell us about 5 courses on your list and let us know why you have chosen them.
The first one that came to mind when you said that was Terra Iti. I don't know why. I've not been there. So let's say Terra Iti, and I'm going to say, I'm doing this off the top of my head. I didn't actually prepare for this, but
you played enough good golf and look at it.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to think of places I haven't been. So
you look at enough pictures anyway.
Yeah, let's say Terra Iti. I'm desperate to get out to Melbourne. So yeah, if you can include all of those in one, like Kingston Heath, Victoria Metropolitan, Royal Melbourne. Terra Iti, I said that. I think there's a handful of courses there. Cape Kidnappers, getting down to Lost Farm and Barnbougle Dunes and 7 Mile Beach. And then, yeah, I'd love to go out and play in California, like Pasatiempo, Cypress Point. I think that West Coast is quite interesting because it's like you're really dealing with quite a similar climate to the UK, especially in like Northern California with more sort of POA. I kind of really, it's opened my eyes this. We played TPC Sawgrass a couple of weeks ago, and that is not a place I thought I would like. And I was just blown away by how good the golf course was and how narrow it was, but because it was so highly maintained, you always found your ball. So it was narrow, but you didn't feel like you had to steer the golf ball, and there was still strategy there. And it just, that kind of really made me rethink a few things. So, I never would have said I want to play Pebble Beach, but I'm sort of starting to think whether I should reconsider some of those views. Anyway, those might be going to Bandon next year. We'll see.
Good. I hope you have your booking.
So where? Cypress Point, Royal Melbourne, or Australian courses, Terra Iti.
That's enough, Ryan. That's enough.
Seminole.
Yeah.
I'd say I'd love to play Seminole, and Bandon Dunes. I'd say.
Yeah. There's no Irish courses in there. You haven't played much over here, have you?
I haven't played much in Ireland. It's
come. You're all more than welcome.
I don't. It's funny. I don't. I mean, again, if you said bucket list, I'm just thinking about New York now. I could spend a month in New York.
You could,
and there's just
there's too much. You're like a kid in a candy shop.
But yeah, in Ireland, I never put Scottish and Irish courses in my bucket list. If I think about them in that way, because a bucket list in my mind is almost like the course you think you might never get to. Whereas Scotland and Ireland, it just feels like, well, of course I'm going to end up playing all of those by the time I'm done. Like, it's just,
You must come over. You must come over. Listen, finally, for listeners that are looking to augment their golfing libraries, what 2 books would you suggest they should consider purchasing?
Does it have to be a golf book?
No, it can be any book. Preferably a golf book, but it can be any book.
Well, I'm reading right now the Daily, for the fathers out there, the Daily Dad, which is like the Ryan Holiday who did the Daily Stoic. It's 1 page a day of how to not fuck up your kids, I guess. But and then I just read. You want golf books, don't you? I've just finished reading a like dystopian novel. 3 of them called. The first one's called Wool. Anyway, really highly recommend that if you're into that sort of like sci-fi dystopian science fiction. That was really cool. I think that's the highest. I read the other day they've turned it into an Apple TV series. It's the highest, the most streamed TV series of all time. Anyway, the book is called Wool, WOOL. The golf books that I have started reading, I don't know that much about it yet, but it's very good, is called Golf's Driving Force by Dean Beeman. He's basically the story of the guy who like orchestrated the PGA Tour into sort of the way that it is today. So that I'd recommend. And then ones that I've read last year, I read a great golf book. I'm trying to remember what it's called now. The one about the match at Cypress Point with Ben Hogan and Ken Venturi. And have you heard about this?
It's called The Match.
It is called The Match.
Yeah. Robert Frost, yeah.
What are those things in Gremlins called?
Mogwais.
The match was great. And then obviously, and what it's stuck with me, but it's got to be 6 or 7 years ago I read it now, but I think it might be by him as well, The Greatest Game Ever Played.
Yeah, that's the one in Denver, isn't it? Or is that the Weme one, or the Denver one as well?
It's the US Open with Harry Vardon and Ted Ray at Brookline. And that was, I mean, those books just seem to just bring that history alive. I don't know how they research them, but it's, they are. Yeah, so those are kind of like more kind of narrative golf books. And then other than that, like the golf course architecture book, the one I did, it was a few years ago, I read it now, but like it's Tom Doe's Little Red Book. That's always fun.
Crosby's one, yeah.
What is that called? The Little Red, I'm just looking at it now, The Little Red Book of Golf Course Architecture. So I found myself reading that and going, and this was before I started the project at the ad, and thinking, this is what I've been telling people. Like, it's here on the page. And it's like, that was actually quite fun, finally, like seeing in writing something that I'd been banging my head against the wall about for a few years at that point. And it's just like a really easy read, that one. There's lots of little snippets. That's
thank you. Listen, before we let you get back to work, I just wanted to check the following with you. Is there any booking availability at the Addington for the summer season 2025?
Yeah, sure. For you.
And what? No. I was just thinking for listenerships. What's the best way to book?
Yeah, we are. Just call the pro shop. Yeah, we are open. We are still allowing visitors. Whether or not we will do in 10 years' time, I don't know. That's still a question we're asking ourselves. We've sort of decided that we're not going to try and make any decisions on exactly what direction we go until we've got some certainty on the planning consents for the clubhouse move and a bit further ahead with the coursework. But yeah, definitely come and call the pro shop, and that'll be the easiest way.
Yeah. Listen, Ryan, it's been my absolute pleasure to host you this morning. So many, many thanks for your time. Continued success to you and the team up there on Shirley Church Road. I can't wait to get back to see the Addington again, and would ultimately strongly suggest that it should go on any listening golfer's London-based golfing itinerary. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers.
Many thanks for tuning in. If you don't currently follow us on socials, you can do so as follows. On X, you can find us at Firm and Fast Golf. On Instagram, Firm and Fast Golf Podcast. On Blue Sky, if you're that way inclined, the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast. On YouTube at the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast, and indeed finally on Substack at the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast occasional newsletter. We favour to ask, if you're still with us, if you're enjoying the show, you might consider giving us a star rating or a review on your podcast platform.